My kids have just gone to bed after we finished reading a story that I'm quite fond of, even though it's from a part of the world that I'm not very familiar with. It's called Ye Xian, and it's one of the earliest Cinderella stories in the world. I don't actually have a lot of expertise in Chinese history or religion or ancient mythology or anything like that, but I've done my best to do some research, and I hope that what I've got here is right. However, if any of you listening know more about this subject than I do, I would be really excited to hear from you. This is a story that was first recorded by a man called Duan Chengshi, and he lived in 9th century China. And he wrote this delightful book with one of the most wonderful titles I've ever heard. It's called Miscellaneous Morsels from Yu Yang. And that title brings to mind just this buffet, a smorgasbord, a collection. And this story had all kinds of things in it. It had legends, myths, even things about tattoos. But I think the most interesting thing in all of it was the story of Ye Xian. And the other thing that I really love about this story is that we even know the name of the person that Duan Chengshi allegedly recorded it from. And this was a servant from the south of China, and his name was Li Shuyan. And I really, really, really love that because the word folk tale literally means a story from the people. And a common servant was the one who told this story over 1,000 years ago, and it was recorded. And I love that we still know his name. So as I tell this story, I hope that you remember Li Shuyan, whoever he was, long ago and far away. Here's the story of Ye Xian. And this time, unlike last time, I'm going to try not to let half my marshmallow drop into the fire. We'll see if that happens. There once was a chieftain of the people who make their homes in caves by the name of Wu. He had 2 wives, and each bore him a daughter. So right away in this story, we have things that will seem quite jarring to the modern listener. One is that people are living in caves. Now, you shouldn't assume that these are dirty, nasty caves. These are probably quite clean structures. I've seen pictures of ancient cave homes in China, and they're clean and neat. It's more, think of homes cut from rock rather than living in a cave. And of course, there's the very casual mention of polygamy, which was extremely common in ancient times. And I'm not going to bother with any modern commentary on, oh, how shocking, or oh, how wrong. It was long ago. Things were different. But one wife sickened and died, and the chieftain followed soon after. The stepmother raised both the girls, but while she was loving toward her own daughter, Junli, she was cruel toward her stepdaughter, who was called Ye Xian. Even though Ye Xian isn't the stepmother's daughter, she is the daughter of her husband. And so in this very ancient, family-based culture, failing to take care of a child that you have responsibility for is not just a violation of duty, it's an act of impiety toward the gods. The mother made Ye Xian do the most difficult and unpleasant of the household chores, such as cutting wood in dangerous places or fetching water from deep wells. The poor girl had only rags to wear. But even her lowly state could not hide the fact that she was kind, clever, and caring. Ye Xian made friends with a fish that lived in a pool near her home. At first it was only 2 inches long, but every day she cared for it, and whenever she would visit it, it would swim to the surface and poke her head out to see her. I love this for 2 reasons. The first is I had enough friends with an Asian cultural and family background that I know that fish represent prosperity. And the fact that this fish will turn out to be gold. I mean, gold is very obviously a symbol of wealth, prosperity, and doing well in life. But when I was a little girl, I had 2 goldfish named Ishy and Fishy. And you know what? They did exactly this. When I would come to feed them, they would come up to the surface of the water and poke their heads up. I don't know if any of the rest of you have had fish as pets, but they will do this. They'll come and kind of stick their heads out and sort of mouth the air, because I think that in their own simple way they're able to recognize that food is on the way when a human approaches the bowl. Soon enough, the fish was 10 feet long and had beautiful golden eyes and gleaming golden scales. The girl didn't know it, but the fish was a guardian spirit sent to her by her mother, who still watched over her. This is an important aspect of traditional Chinese belief from long, long ago. Now, remember, this is from more than 1,000 years ago, but still, so in Western culture, if you think of kind of the Christian religion and things like that, when spirits leave this world, they go to heaven, which is a place that's completely separate from the earth. But my understanding of Eastern religion is that spirits are more bound to this world. And so when someone dies, they don't vanish to another realm, but they continue to stick around and look after their offspring. So this is just an example of how, although Ye Xian's family has died and she's been left to the horrible care of her awful stepmother, she still has these guardians who are looking out for her. Although Ye Xian never had enough to eat for herself, she always managed to find something to feed her beloved friend. Her visits to the pond were her only source of joy. One day, Junli followed Ye Xian to the pond and saw her talking to the fish. Angry that her stepsister should have any happiness, Junli told her mother what she saw. The stepmother, resentful that the girl should have anything pleasant in her life, tricked Ye Xian into giving her the tattered dress that she always wore. By disguising herself in Ye Xian's clothes, the stepmother was able to approach the fish. She drew out a knife and quickly killed it. The body of the beautiful golden fish was dragged back to the cave where the stepmother and Junli ate it for supper. So this is not only an act of cruelty, but impiety. Remember, back to these Confucian ideas of duty and responsibility and filial piety. Filial piety, that's difficult to say. So by killing this fish, the stepmother is not only showing cruelty toward Ye Xian, but she's showing profound disrespect toward the ancestor spirits who are trying to look after this girl. And this is an act that is dishonorable and disrespectful and is definitely going to blow back on her in a pretty horrible way. Let's check on this marshmallow. Not quite toasted yet. Ye Xian was devastated when she saw what had become of her friend. She remained inconsolable until the spirit of an old man appeared before her and told her that she should put the bones of the fish in 4 pots and hide them under the 4 corners of her bed. In this way, she could still communicate with her guardian spirit, and the bones would grant her wishes, so long as she was wise in making requests and responsible with what she was given. The relationship between guardian spirits and the living is very much a two-way street. If you are respectful to them, if you look after them, maintain shrines, look after graves, then they'll help you. But as with any friendship or relationship, if you're disrespectful or selfish, then, the other party's just going to walk away. So when this spirit appears to her, it might be a grandfather, a great-grandfather, an uncle. I mean, it's not specified in the story, but that's not really important. What matters most is that this old man who's appeared to her is an ancestor of some kind, and he said, look, if you follow my instructions, if you show filial piety, if you're respectful and honorable, then we'll help you out and look after you. And I think it's also interesting that the bones will grant her wishes so long as that her wishes are wise. And this is an example of good parenting where, you can't say yes to your child all the time. The worst parents say yes to their kids all the time and never let them cry, never let them be unhappy, give them everything they want. So if you can teach your kid to be responsible and only ask for things that are good for them, then of course you'll always say yes. And that's the ideal relationship, right? Is that your kid will ask you for things that are actually good for them, and so you'll say yes, and eventually the child will develop enough wisdom to not ask for things that would not be good for them. Later on, the springtime festival drew near. This was a time when the young people of the village would find someone to marry. But the stepmother forbade Ye Xian from going, fearing that her beautiful, kind, and hardworking stepdaughter might hurt Junli's chances of finding a husband. Ye Xian was ordered to clean the cave house and look after the fruit trees in the orchard, while the stepmother and her daughter attended the festival. Ye Xian, heartbroken, made a secret wish to the bones. Suddenly, she found herself clothed in a gown of green silk and wrapped in a beautiful cloak made of bright blue kingfisher feathers. I looked up kingfishers in Chinese mythology because I was curious to know if that bird had any special significance, and I saw that the kingfisher is associated with female beauty. So it's a fairly straightforward symbol, but just the idea that she's wrapped in female loveliness is kind of a very pretty image, and kingfisher feathers are really, really gorgeous if you've ever seen them before. On Ye Xian's tiny feet were slippers made of gold. The bones told Ye Xian to go to the festival and enjoy herself, but to be careful and bring back all of the beautiful clothes that she was given to wear. Looks like we're nearly there. She walked to the festival, and when she arrived, everyone was amazed by her beauty, grace, and lovely manners. Many whispered that she must be a princess. Ye Xian had a wonderful time at the festival until she saw the face of her stepsister, Junli, who was beginning to think that there was something familiar about the lovely maiden in the blue cloak of feathers. Ye Xian fled the festival, knowing that she must get home before she was discovered. As she ran, one of her lovely golden shoes slipped off of her foot and was left behind. When she arrived home, she found that the fish bones were silent. They could not speak to her because not all her clothes were returned, and so their magic was not complete. You can see here that sort of transactional relationship with the ancestor spirits that I talked about before. I don't know if I would interpret this as her being punished as such. And again, if you have more understanding about this, let me know. It's just more that she didn't fulfill her end of the instructions. She didn't do what the guardian spirit told her to do. And so, it kind of broke the spell in a manner of speaking. So, I can imagine she's feeling probably pretty stressed out about all this, and she's worried, and, she's upset her ancestors and broken the magic, so who knows what's going to happen to her. I know what's going to happen to this marshmallow, though, and I'm going to eat it because it is perfectly toasted on the outside and nice and melty on the inside. The golden slipper was found by a peasant who traded it to another man, who then presented it to the king of the Tohan Islands. The king was amazed by the craftsmanship and beauty of the slipper. He decided that he must marry the woman who owned the shoe and ordered a search for her. Eventually, the king came to the place where the cave dwellers live, and each young woman was asked to try on the slipper. It's so interesting that there's a shoe in this one because it's very similar to the European versions of the story, and there's no way to prove it. Some people write very definitively, oh yes, all of the European ones are based on this Chinese version. I have no way of knowing if that's true or not based on my research. There's just no way to know. But it is interesting that a shoe would be kind of this symbol of the right girl. Maybe that's because shoes as everyday objects would have mostly been dirty and disposable. Shoes are one of the most common things that you find in, say, medieval and ancient refuse pits because they were made of leather, they were very simple, they used up very quickly. And so the idea of having a very beautiful shoe definitely would have been a symbol of status, the fact that you can afford to have this really gorgeous, well-made thing that you walk on and that's going to wear out quickly. So I'm not sure if that's why it is. There's a lot of different theories. I'd be interested to hear maybe from you. Do you have a theory? Why is it that shoes show up so often in Cinderella stories? I don't know. I haven't made up my mind, and if you've got ideas, maybe you can help me. Ye Xian's stepmother forced her to stay at home, hidden from the view of the king and his entourage. But of course, the slipper fit none of the other young women, including Zhenli. Devastated, the king put up a pavilion with the slipper on display inside, in hopes of finding the mysterious maiden. Late at night, desperate to regain her ability to speak to the bones, Ye Xian crept into the pavilion to retrieve the slipper. But she was discovered by a watchful guard and accused of being a thief. Ye Xian threw herself down and confessed everything to the king about her miserable childhood, about the beautiful golden fish who was her only friend, about its cruel slaughter, and how its bones granted her wishes. The king saw that she was beautiful, honest, and well-mannered. He believed her and allowed her to depart with the slipper. In the morning, the king came to Ye Xian's home and saw that everything was as she had said. Ye Xian put her golden slippers on and was suddenly clothed again in her beautiful jade green dress with the blue cloak of kingfisher feathers. So you can see that now that she's restored the other slipper to her collection, the power of the bones is back. Her ancestors are no longer annoyed with her. And I mean, this might be a little glib on my part, but just as a mom, I can kind of sympathize because, you know, sometimes in the morning we're getting ready for school and I'm saying to the kids, like, where are your shoes? Where are your shoes? I had them right here. You just, where's your backpack? Where's your water bottle? Where's your lunchbox? Where's your coat? Like, please, parents, speak up. Let me know that this has been a problem for you too, because it can be incredibly frustrating when you're trying to leave the house and your kids' stuff is just like everywhere and you can't find it and you're checking your watch going, we're going to be late. So I sort of think it's funny that in this very ancient story from more than 1,000 years ago, the ancestors are still annoyed at the kid for being like, where's your shoes? Where's your shoes? Where did you put your shoes? The stepmother sneered that Ye Xian was only a slave and that she had stolen the clothes from Zhenli, the true owner of the shoes. But the king could see the truth. In the very ancient Chinese way of thinking about things, things go down the male line. So even though Ye Xian isn't her biological daughter, she is the daughter of her husband, if that makes sense. So the stepmother would have an obligation to do a good duty to her husband and care for her husband's children, even if those children weren't her children, if that makes sense. So this shows again how this stepmother isn't just kind of petty and cruel, but she's actually impious. She should have a duty to look after Ye Xian. I mean, obviously, you know, things are different when you're a stepmother as opposed to a biological mother, but they don't really have to be in terms of your understanding of this is a child that needs to be cared for, and I have a duty toward this child. I know plenty of step-parents who are loving and caring and dutiful toward their stepchildren, and they understand that tricky balance between not wanting to trespass on, you know, the biological relationship, but that shouldn't lessen the obligation you feel toward a child who is vulnerable and needs your care. The king told Ye Xian that he wished to marry her and take her to be the queen of the Tohan Islands. Ye Xian gave her consent and left with the king to live happily with him. The stepmother and Zhenli were left behind. The stepmother, having lost her slave, now forced her daughter to do all of the household work, treating her just as badly as she had treated Ye Xian. So this shows that this stepmother really has no limits in terms of violating her duty. I mean, now that she doesn't have a stepdaughter to mistreat, she's even mistreating her biological daughter. So this just shows that she's just fundamentally a failure as a parent. Zhenli, having been raised to be as selfish as her mother, rebelled against this, and the two women lived in misery until one day when they had a quarrel so violent that they caused the cave to collapse, killing them both. When my oldest daughter heard this story just a little while ago before she went to bed, she said, serves them right, which is I can't really argue with that. I mean, in terms of the morality of this story, I mean, obviously we shouldn't smile at the casual death of someone, but they did kind of make their own bed, so they had to lie in it underneath a ton of rocks. There are other versions of this story in which the king grows greedy, and after marrying Ye Xian, he gains control over the bones, and he becomes very, very greedy with his use of it, and he overuses the bones, asking for gold and pearls and jewels and things. And eventually the bones stop responding to his wishes, and that underscores the transactional nature of this kind of ancestor worship in ancient China, where I mean, just sort of think of it as if you went to your grandmother or grandfather and were constantly hitting them up for cash and favors, eventually, a good parent would cut you off. They'd say, no, you're being greedy. What are you doing for me? What are you doing for others? You're just in this for yourself. So this is not just a petty action on the part of the ancestor spirits. This is them going, hey, you're really not being a good person here, so we're cutting you off. And in this version of the story, eventually the king gathers the gifts that he's obtained from the ancestor spirits, but they're washed away into the sea and taken away from him. So it shows how when you're given a generous gift, you need to show the appropriate kind of respect and gratitude toward those who gave it to you. And that's, at least from my understanding, a very classically Confucian belief about how you should behave toward your ancestors and those who came before you. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. Have you ever heard the story of Ye Xian before? What do you think of it? How do you think it compares to other Cinderella stories? And if you have more of an insight into ancient Chinese culture, religious practices in terms of ancestor worship, anything like that, I sure would love to hear what you think about this. Thanks so much for listening.